Just real quick here, intermediate sanctions, intermediary as your book calls them, intermediate. Okay, look at the word intermediate. Intermediate school. It's the school between elementary school down here and high school up there. Intermediate sanctions or punishments are punishments that's between the low end of probation and the high end of prison. And so mid-range punishments that fall between probation on the one end and prison on the other. So we could sentence somebody to economic sanctions. Right? Now, we're not typically just going to do this alone, but we use them with other sanctions, so we might charge you fines. Asset forfeiture, right? You have to give over anything that was associated with that crime. Restitution, you have to pay back. Or if you don't have any money, not a problem. There's this cool thing called community service. We'll let you work it off. 500 hours or something. Intensive supervised probation. Now, we've made allusion to this already. This is just basically for those offenders who need more than regular supervision, but who are not ready for prison. We don't quite need to put them in prison yet, but if we just put them on regular probation, they're going to fail. House arrest. Detention in your own home. Anybody see the movie Disturbia? Yeah, well, okay, if you remove the neighbor next door that was a murderer from the equation, basically you got a guy that he's been confined to his own home, but it's still a cage. And after about a week or two, he starts going stir crazy because he can't go anywhere. A cage is a cage. It doesn't matter if the bars are made of gold. And it's a very cost-effective way to detain low-risk offenders because they're paying for everything. Often used with electronic monitoring or GPS. We've got community residential centers for those people who aren't quite ready to make it back to the community coming out. So we call these halfway houses. And basically they provide structure, accountability, and treatment in-house. Now they're not locked unit, but you sign in and out, and we know generally where you are, and there's a higher level of accountability than if you're just out in an apartment or living with your family. We have split sentences, sometimes called shock probation. So this is where you get sentenced to jail for a period of time, might be a few weeks or months, and then we'll bring you out on probation. And the idea here is to shock your senses a little bit, to say, hey, did you like that? This is what it could be like. So you probably want to straighten up and fly right now, don't you? And that's how that works. We'll shock them a little bit with the idea of jail and then bring them on probation. It's low cost, it's effective for less serious felons, and in some cases, we could even have them serve their time on weekends, which means they can keep their jobs and continue to be contributing members of society instead of a drain on taxpayers. And we've got shock incarceration, that's your boot camp. It's very shocking. So it's run like a military boot camp. We have one here in Michigan. It costs more money than probation, but it is much cheaper than prison. It costs more money than probation because they're residential, they're staying there for 3 months. And there is a high staff to inmate ratio. In other words, we have a lot of staff there who want to give you lots of love, similar to this officer here with this inmate. Yes, this officer is undoubtedly giving him love right now. Now, problem in Michigan is we use it as a last chance. Other places use it for first-time felons, and they have a higher success rate than we do with it. We use it as the last-ditch effort before we send somebody to prison for keeps. So our success rate is a bit lower because of that. Probation is the most successful correctional sentence. That's it. It works. Family and community ties are not severed. You get to remain in the community. And the effectiveness is based on the individualized conditions. And so we say, what does it take to make it work for you? The type and quality of supervision. And it is way cheaper than prison, between 10 and 30 times cheaper than prison. The person on probation is in the community. Guess what? They pay their own rent, their own utilities, they buy their own groceries, they cover their own living expenses. Whereas if somebody's in prison, the taxpayer is doing that. They pay court costs, fees, restitution. They work, they pay taxes, they support their family. Are you seeing how this is kind of a win-win? So if we don't need to incarcerate them, why should we? Why would we? Because it's so much cheaper to do this. It is more successful than parole. You probably guessed that. Because we are dealing with different types of offenders. Apples and oranges. Probationers haven't been to prison. And prison changes people. Time out changes a man. Now, but parolees are hardened by their experiences. Prison is not a good thing for anybody. Most people do not get changed for the better by prison. It changes you inside. Remember Donovan Green? I still have prison ways about me. And he was all closed off emotionally, and it was very hard for him to open up and be free with his emotions. We've got about a 50% success rate for parole. Now, Department of Corrections would argue with me and say that it's 30%. But from what I hear on the inside, talking to corrections officers and actual probation and parole officers, it's running about 45, 50%. I mean, I'm sorry, not success rate. Yeah, Department of Corrections says it's now about 80% successful. Yeah, I'm doing my math backwards, sorry. So Department of Corrections says they've got about an 80% success rate. Real numbers are about 50%. But they're still pretty good. I mean, if you look at how the deck is stacked, look at what happened to Donovan Green and all the obstacles that kept getting thrown in his way. I think 50% is actually pretty good. 1 out of every 2 is successful. I think that's pretty good, and I think that's worth spending the money and the effort on. Because for everybody we keep out, we're saving $35,000 per person per year, right?